The craziest stat lines in NBA history. We looked at a bunch from the past 10 years, but now we're going back even further to as far back as stats were recorded and looking at more there. And of course, I'm not going to mention any stat lines that I already talked about in the other videos, so if you want to see those, the links are in the description. For this video though, honestly, crazy stat lines were a lot less frequent than they are today, but the ones that we do have are just as wild. Plus, there would be a ton more of things like blocks were recorded back when Wilt and Bill Russell played, so keep that in mind. Speaking of big men though, we all remember Roy Hibbert, the Indiana Pacers big man who was a rising young star alongside Paul George and Lance Stevenson in the early 2010s. As a trio, they were all getting better and trying to take down LeBron and the Miami Heat in the playoffs every season. And Hibbert was a huge piece of the team, at the time being one of the best rim protectors in the league and averaging 17 and 10 in the 2013 playoffs. And his success carried on the next year when he became an all-star for the second time in his career and even helped the team to the best record in the Eastern Conference. But then those playoffs came around and honestly the man literally forgot how to play or something, and it still makes no sense to this day. Because in Game 5 against the 8th seeded Atlanta Hawks, the man put up the stat line of 0 points and 0 rebounds. The starting center of a 1 seed and all-star that year put up almost no stats in a playoff game, which definitely makes it one of the craziest stat lines ever. And after 12 minutes he was obviously taken out for the rest of the game. And that was the end of that game. That was the stat line, so while we could just move on there, no. The man scored 0 points and recorded 2 rebounds the next game. Then in game 1 of the next round against the Wizards, he did the same exact thing. 0 points and 0 rebounds in 18 minutes of play in the playoffs. I mean, alright, even if you're not going to score, how are you going to be 7'1" under the rim the entire game and not grab one single rebound? And we've never seen a rising star's talent vanish like that right before our eyes. But it was a permanent thing because after that, he never really played the same again. Let's go the opposite way now though. That was a not so dominant performance, but let's just hurry and mention Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game because we all know it's here. And it's not just for the 100 points, because he had that along with 25 rebounds and 3 assists. Hey, at least he had 3. But for real, there's no doubt that this would have been a 100-point triple-double too if they had counted blocks back then. And I mean, if there was any game footage out there, we could count just how many. But since we can't, this is his final stat line. And while we're talking about him, let's not forget about his other historic night where he set the long-standing record for most rebounds in a game. And on that night, he recorded 34 points and 55 rebounds in a game against Bill Russell and the Celtics. And this game perfectly describes the debate between Wilt and Bill and why it makes you wonder who's better. Because in the game, Russell finished with 18 points and 19 rebounds, far inferior to Wilt, but like in most of their matchups, the Celtics pulled away with the win here, which leads to the debate on if individual dominance or playing for team success should lead to a player ranking higher all time or not. Comment your thoughts on it down below though. And if we mention Wilt's 100-point game, we gotta give a quick shout out to Kobe's 81-point performance because of the box score that it gave him. But just because we had to mention those doesn't mean we're gonna go on and talk about every high scoring game in this video. The last 60+ game though that I did want to mention was Michael Jordan's, where he put up the insane stat line of 69 points, 18 rebounds, 6 assists, and 4 steals. And this was definitely MJ's best statistical game. By far one of the best scorers of all time, and on this night he was able to combine a near 70-point performance, which is rare enough, with 18 rebounds, which a guard is rarely ever able to get, but he did what it took to get the win. He helped force the game into overtime, led his team to victory, played over 50 minutes, and scored the 69 on only 2 made 3-pointers, which is even more impressive. I don't know if you can call this next one impressive though, because on January 6, 2005, Rip Hamilton went 0 for 10 from the field, but got to the line for 14 free throws and made all of them, finishing the game with 14 points while not making a single shot. But that's not all, because he led his entire Pistons team in points that night. He didn't make a single shot and had more points than anyone else on a roster made up of Chauncey Billups, Tayshaun Prince, Bill Wallace, and Rasheed Wallace. And it really is just an example of how the Pistons played back then and the kind of team they were. Relied heavily on defense and didn't have a main go-to guy for scoring. That night though, Tayshaun was the second leading scorer with 13, and unsurprisingly the Pistons did get blown out. It's even weirder though, because like it's normal for a guy to have an off night where nothing goes in for him. It happens. But for on the same night to go 14 for 14 from the line and not miss a single free throw, I mean, make up your mind, is it a bad night or not? And because of this is why it's without a doubt one of the weirdest stat lines you'll ever see. Another strange one belongs to 7'7" Manute Bol for putting up 4 points, 4 rebounds, and 15 blocks in a game. And this one's still hard to comprehend. But as you may know or may have expected, Manute Bol was one of the best shot blockers scorers of all time, as he should have been. And that's the kind of player he was. He could protect the rim, but really couldn't play offense or grab rebounds somehow. And stat lines like this really weren't uncommon to come from him, but this was definitely the most Manute-like game that he ever had. And speaking of putting up a lot of one single stat and not doing too much else, that brings us to the night Allen Houston had 37 points, 0 rebounds, 0 assists, 0 steals, and 0 blocks. And like, how does this even happen? Basically, he just stood around, waited for the ball, and whenever he got it, he only had one thing in mind. And this would have been different if it was almost any other player in the league, but since it was Allen Houston, who was known his whole career for being a ball hog and a player that only scores, proven by his career averages of 17, 2, and 2, it just shows that it wasn't simply a coincidence. The same thing though happened to Michael Redd 2 years later in 2002, and he was also basically a player that was known and disliked by many for only scoring. And it was how he was able to score 29 points while not only recording 0 rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks, but also 0 turnovers and having committed 0 fouls. Now that honestly takes some dedication. So both of those players probably caught some heat for those games, but I'm sure neither man lost more respect than Joel Anthony did in 2011. When in a game for the Miami Heat, Joel played 28 minutes and 46 seconds at center and didn't record a single point, block, rebound, assist, or steal, on paper having done nothing at all while on the court. We know that he did add to some other aspects of the game even though he didn't record any stats, but on paper it's not a good look, and neither is setting the NBA record for most time played without recording a single stat. Tony Snell also did the same thing in 2017 when he played 28 minutes and 12 seconds and also didn't record any stats. I mean, everyone wants to hold an NBA record, but probably not one like this. But honestly, in 2013, at the time, Nets role player CJ Watson literally one-upped both Joel Anthony and Tony Snell by having a night where he recorded 1 point, 1 block, 1 steal, and 1 turnover. I mean, this one's clearly a coincidence, but if you want to make it even weirder, his jersey number for the Nets was the number 1. But let's get back to some that are a little more impressive, like the game where Dennis Rodman was able to grab 28 rebounds and not score a single point because he didn't have to. His job was to grab the board, pass it back out to his teammate, usually MJ, or pass it down to the court to start the fast break. And as we learned from The Last Dance, the man had it down to an art, and him studying other players' shots and how the ball would spin and how shots from different areas on the floor would bounce to certain spots is a perfect example of what more players need to do and capitalize on their strengths to hide their weaknesses. And for Dennis, it was how he was able to have scoreless games with 28 rebounds, 25 rebounds, 24, 21, and 20 on 3 separate occasions. So he would really do it all the time, but the 28 rebound game was definitely the best one. Another impressive stat line was accomplished by Hakeem Olajuwon for putting up 48 points on 24 of 40 from the field. And at first glance, that really doesn't seem all too impressive. But when you factor in that he didn't attempt a single free throw is what makes it pretty weird. I mean, he also shot no threes and just simply made 24 shots that night. It's weird for a player to not make a free throw and get 48 points. It never happens when a player doesn't even attempt one, and it seems impossible for it to have been done by a center, because centers draw the most fouls, and with him scoring near the rim 24 times, how does a single person not foul him? I mean, I guess though if it was gonna be done, it makes sense that it was by Hakeem, because we're talking in the 90s when fouls were called less, and Olajuwon was known for faking out defenders with the dream shake and not being a traditional back to the basket big man, so it does make a little more sense in that context. Still weird though. Now John Stockton also put up a stat line that's worth mentioning but doesn't really ever get talked about, and it was on the night where he not only put up 20 points and a near all-time record 28 assists, but he also added 8 steals to the mix to almost set an NBA record in assists while scoring 20 points by putting up the rare nearly 10 steals in a game. Makes this overall one of the most impressive stat lines really ever. A combination like this is rare, and it makes sense because you gotta be very efficient to do so. It also makes sense from a feasibility standpoint though, because you get the 8 steals and it gives you more possessions to get assists and points. And the more assists you get, the more players play off of you so you can score more. So they all go hand in hand pretty nicely. And he was efficient that night. I really don't know whether or not Corey Maggette should be called efficient for his stat line though. I'm not too sure about this one, because listen to this. In 10 minutes of play, he went 0 for 2 from the field, but shot 20 free throw attempts and made 17 of them, scoring 17 points in 10 minutes. So I mean, even though he didn't make a field goal, I guess that would be called efficient. It's not a question though of how efficient Bill Russell was, and it gets some extra props for this one because his performance wasn't in just any game, it was in game 7 of the 1962 NBA Finals, where he recorded 30 points and 40 rebounds. Of course, the 34 and 55 was more impressive on paper by Wilt Chamberlain, that we mentioned at the beginning of the video, but like I said, that game resulted in a loss, and it wasn't with a championship on the line. And of course for Russell, this game for him resulted in a W. And it can't get much better than that, but it also can't get much worse than the night that Russell Butler had in 2012. By this point of his career, he was towards the end of it, having bounced around every year to different teams, and being known as a locker room veteran for his years of experience. So in 2012 on the Raptors, it was a close game between the Raptors and the Lakers. 93-92, the Lakers up by 1, with the Raptors inbounding the ball with 4.2 seconds left. Now Rasul hadn't played a second of the game up until now, but coach subbed him in here to inbound thanks to his previously mentioned veteran leadership. But with him unable to find a pass, a 5-second violation is committed, and he's then subbed out of the game, leaving his final box score to say that he had played 0 actual minutes and 0 seconds in the game, but committed 1 turnover in what may be the most inefficient performance possible. Switching back to efficiency though, the last major all-time stat line that deserved a quick mention was Shaq's game for the Lakers, where he put up 28 points, 20 rebounds, 9 assists and 8 blocks in game 2 of the 2001 NBA Finals, by the way. And he did it against the all-star Dikembe Mutombo. He didn't even record a triple-double this night, but was still extremely close to a quadruple-double in the finals. And this kind of game really shows who Shaq was at times, being completely dominant on both ends, and really in every aspect of the game. And with that, we've seen weird stat lines, great ones, terrible ones, and some that you probably would have never knew existed. So if you enjoyed the video and learned something new, drop a like, subscribe because 85% of you still aren't subscribed, comment your thoughts, and I'll catch you next video.